Hey there. You're listening to True Story No Cap. Real stories, no exaggeration, no lies. Just the raw, unfiltered moments life throws our way. Relax, lean back, and let's get started. Eleanor shrugged her shoulders sharply and, exhaling heavily, fixed her gaze on the window pane. However, the view outside offered no solace. On the dull platform, glistening with puddles, the usual station hustle and bustle unfolded, unchanging before the departure of a long-distance train. In these moments, life seemed to pick up incredible speed. Movements became feverish, faces joyfully startled, and conductors particularly nervous and unwelcoming. In principle, they could be understood. Was it really so difficult for respectable citizen passengers to arrive at the station well in advance? To approach their carriage beforehand and calmly take their assigned seat? No, they absolutely had to rush to board at the very last moment, only to then crowd together by the dozen, shouting and waving tickets while simultaneously storming the narrow passage, which not everyone could even manage to fit through upright on the first try. Look, for example, at the lady in the clearly tight skirt, pondering how she might, without risking either her outfit or her reputation, still manage to swing her leg onto the step. Honestly, it's amusing. What on earth did she find to wear for a journey? And someone else, for whom the assault on the carriage is yet to come, in the final, desperately late minutes, rushes along the platform, dropping bags, string bags, children, and the last of their strength along the way. Like, say, this man who is dragging two-wheeled suitcases with an enormous bag piled on top of each. It's astonishing how some people manage to take so much luggage with them, just like dung beetles or ants, capable of dragging a load exceeding their own weight. And if it were just things, but some also stock up on provisions for the journey, as if it were their last chance to eat their fill. There's that short, plump woman shifting from foot to foot, with her arms spread wide, clutching a dozen bread baguettes between them. Evidently, she fears not reaching her destination and starving to death en route, although she looks as though she could survive for at least a year without any food at all, let alone bread, which, by the way, would only do her good. Oh, and who is striding along with remarkable composure? Look at that fellow. Glasses on his nose, and in his hands such an impressive collection of crosswords that it's visible even from here. Well, I'll be an intellectual. He'll spend the whole journey pretending to be a know-it-all, while constantly peeking at the back of the magazine after every other word to look up the right answer. And if you, sir, are so clever, why do you check your ticket every 5 steps and then raise your head to the carriage number sign? Surely your 2, or perhaps even 3 diplomas don't help you simply remember a number and calmly look for it? Ah, that's it. The composure has vanished. He glanced at his watch, realized he was late, and also started rushing along the platform like a goose. And someone else, conversely, is frozen in place, fighting the urge to bolt, not waiting for the train to depart. These are clearly people seeing others off. Look, for instance, there's a fussy, skinny fellow hovering, who just moments ago, straining himself, helped a rather unattractive lady into the carriage, her build about 3 times his own. The lady gave him a very expressive, stern look for good measure, and even poked a fist under his nose to be more convincing. The man's face shows clear relief and joy, which he very awkwardly tries to hide under a mask of sorrow. He's probably rid of his dearest wife, at least for a while, and now he's trying not to jump for joy right here on the platform. And here's another type of farewell giver, the romantic kind, so to speak. A girl, thin, pale, with lipstick smeared across her lips and clear streaks of mascara on her cheeks. What do we have here? A real drama? I wonder who she's seeing off? Ah, that guy over there. There he is, peering out of the carriage door, and the conductor, far from romantic, is apparently trying to shove him back in. Well, they seem to be in love. How wonderful, if you ignore the fact that the guy is clearly pleased. Look how happily he's waving his arms, he almost fell off the step. And the girl, on the contrary, is all sadness. Obviously, she feels that nothing good will come of this parting for her personally. Yes, my dear girl, yes. Your boy will go to the capital now, and you'll never see him again. Ellie suddenly started and listened in astonishment to her own thoughts. What was wrong with her? Where did all this bile come from? This malicious irony towards complete strangers who were guilty of nothing? Why was she standing by the carriage window, practically spitting sparks of irritation? She had never been like this. What kind of ridiculous and, most importantly, malicious thoughts were swirling in her head? After all, Perhaps everything was completely different. Probably the man with the huge luggage was the father of a large family, and when calculated per person, there was only one bag or one suitcase, which was perfectly normal. And now, instead of a man courageously carrying the luggage of all his household members appeared before her eyes. Well, who was with him? Maybe 5 children were waiting for him on the benches, or rather, on the shelves in the compartment. And the aunt with the baguettes was the mother of the family, and the loaves in her hands were just a couple of snacks. And the intelligent man with the crossword collection was actually a brilliant person, an erudite. And not only did he not peek at the answers, but on the contrary, he himself composed these puzzles. And with the farewell givers, everything could be completely different. The guy and the girl really loved each other, and she was crying not from suspicion and bad premonitions, but from separation. And he was just a cheerful person who even expressed his sadness with a smile. He went on business, and when he returned, they would get married and everything would be very good for them. And the lady in the tight skirt was great. She waved her hand, smiled shyly, and, pulling the fabric higher, got into the carriage, incidentally causing a wave of joyful approval from both those seeing her off and the men waiting to board. Indeed, traveling by train is no reason to dress in shapeless, unattractive clothes. A woman should always remain a woman if her soul demands makeup, a skirt, and heels. A long-distance carriage is no obstacle to this. And even that skinny fellow, maybe he was just happy that he managed to squeeze his immense wife into the carriage, because she could easily not have fit through the door. Although no, with this man, her initial suspicions were most likely correct. He was pacing too impatiently. He clearly had more interesting plans and didn't want to waste a minute of his free time. Feeling herself being carried away again, and the smile that had appeared on her face again slipping into a sarcastic smirk, Eleanor moved away from the window. No, it was still not normal that she was so irritated. She needed to get a grip on herself somehow and not turn into a wicked shrew. She went into the compartment and sat down in her seat. The reason for this bilious outburst was, in principle, understandable. Eleanor couldn't stand trains and everything associated with them. The mere thought that instead of 4 hours of dozing in an airplane seat, she would have to spend 3 days in a carriage, constantly getting up, sitting down, even lying down, if, of course, she dared to do so, simply tormented her. She had never in her life spent so much time on a train. Such a long journey was frankly terrifying. And in general, she couldn't shake off the ridiculous and stupid but obsessive thought that having boarded the carriage as a relatively young woman, she would get off it as a gray-haired and trembling old woman. The long train journey was forced, the only opportunity to return home in the near future. Eleanor Margaret Smith, a financial auditor for a large company, was on a business trip to one of the holding's most remote enterprises. The deadlines for the audit, initiated by the firm's management, were uncertain, and Eleanor had not booked a return ticket, believing that it was never too late to do so. Imagine her astonishment when, instead of the usual ticket form, she was handed some kind of voucher. "What is this?" she asked, surprised. "It's a train ticket," the girl from the factory secretariat told her happily. "You know what?" Ellie exclaimed indignantly. "You must be kidding. Hand this nonsense back. I'm not going by train." "Well, that's fine," the cheeky girl nodded. "In that case, Eleanor Margaret, you'll be staying with us for a long time. Well, at least for another month. Do you understand?" Seeing that Ellie was boiling over, the girl decided to explain herself after all. This isn't the capital after all. There are only 2 flights a week, and tickets for them are bought a month or even 2 in advance, especially now in the height of holiday season. So what? Why should that concern me? Your duty is to provide me with a ticket, so be kind enough to provide it, and I don't care how you do it. I have to fly out the day after tomorrow, or at the latest in 2 days. I need to be there by Wednesday. Well, that's good. I've done my duty. I've provided you with a ticket. You'll leave by train tomorrow and be there on Wednesday. The girl, judging by her demeanor, was very confident and looked at Ellie rather defiantly. It became clear that arguing further was simply pointless. Eleanor snatched the ticket from the girl's fingers and picked up her phone. "Hello, this is the airline ticket office," she said into the receiver. "I need a ticket for tomorrow's flight." "You know, so do I," came the voice from the receiver. "Outrageous," Eleanor articulated clearly to the giggling interlocutor and hung up. She simply couldn't stand traveling by train. All that road romance, the groves and fields flashing past the window, the wires and poles racing alongside the carriage, none of it brought her joy. Tears of tenderness did not well up at the beauty and vastness of the Russian landscapes, and she didn't feel like reciting Yesenin's poems. On the contrary, the flickering of the tree trunks quickly brought on a slight nausea. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels, so beloved by many passengers, did not soothe her, but on the contrary irritated her. The food, which again many passengers actively used to brighten up the long journey, stuck in Eleanor's throat, causing sensations similar to those she felt from the flickering outside the window. She could only sleep normally if three conditions were strictly met: complete darkness, complete silence, and complete stillness. It was not difficult to guess that with such demands, there was no question of any sleep for Ellie on the train. How could anyone possibly sleep when everything around you is shaking, creaking, rattling, flashing with glimmers of light, and speaking in different voices? Oh, and here's the most important thing: the notorious carriage conversation, which for some reason is considered mandatory, as if the fact that people suddenly found themselves in a confined space makes them almost relatives and like-minded people on matters of child-rearing, growing flowers, the terrible quality of products in shops, and real estate prices, which are, well, simply outrageous and keep soaring. And if someone doesn't want to participate in these discussions, they immediately become unpleasant to everyone and generally a very suspicious person. Such outcasts are looked at expressively, and eventually the person without interests is forced to sheepishly leave the compartment so as not to interfere with normal people discussing vital topics. In short, the entire carriage atmosphere was deeply unpleasant to Eleanor. All right, never mind. I'll just sit as long as I can. I'll think about my own things, maybe read, maybe doze off. In short, I'll survive somehow. She finally resigned herself to the inevitable, listening to the very wheels that had started rattling over the points as the train pulled away. The women in the compartment seemed all right. At least for now, they were quiet and hadn't taken out their cutlets from their bags. And then her resignation was once again in danger. What danger? Simply merciless destruction. Oh, my dear, I see you have the Amateur Gardener magazine. Are you interested in tomatoes, are you? Oh, wonderful. Tell me, dear, have you tried planting the Moscow ultra-early tomato? Came the words from the lower bunk neighbor, addressed to another passenger. The lively elderly woman looked with pleasure at the younger, more cheerful lady. At least the upper bunk didn't bother her at all. Oh, wait! The occupant of the upper bunk deftly slid down and stared at the old woman in admiration. What did you say? No, I don't even know that one. I always plant Ural. It's also early. Oh, come on, that's the last century, declared authoritatively the native of, at least, the first half of that very last century, and even closer to its beginning. There's a wonderful variety, Moscow early ripening. You must try it, it's absolutely amazing. I planted in May directly into open ground, and the most important thing is, it doesn't need pinching back at all. You don't say, really? Her interlocutor exclaimed in surprise, even pressing her hands together in silent rapture. Yes, yes. And its tops are so wonderful, fragrant, so bright. It's a pity you can't give them to piglets, but mine eat carrot tops with pleasure too, although some clever people also say, you mustn't. The elderly woman continued to unfold the picture of her hobbies before her admiring interlocutor. Oh, yes. You should listen less to all sorts of people. What do they understand? The other woman actively agreed. Nothing will happen. I, by the way, love fresh tops myself, both in salad and in soup, and you can just chew on them. Oh, and do you know how much they help with joints? Really? The specialist in growing non-pinched tomatoes became interested. Uh-huh, the fan of tops exclaimed. So, here's how. You take a couple of fluffy carrot tops, chop them up, brew them with boiling water, and then... Eleanor slid off her seat and, feeling the pitying glances on her back, left the compartment. The day was drawing to a close. The sun, hanging exactly on the side Eleanor was looking at from the carriage window, had dipped towards the horizon and was flooding everything around with a pinkish golden light, casting reflections on the glass. It was very beautiful, and even such a person, as her mother used to joke about her, a thick-skinned nature, as Eleanor Smith, felt this beauty. When they were handing out romanticism and rapture, our Ellie was pushing her way to the front of the queue for intelligence and perseverance. Her mother would laugh, hinting at her daughter's not at all girlish character. Ellie did indeed very rarely admire landscapes, still lifes, and other picturesque combinations, but this time, perhaps because there was nothing else to do, and for the first time in many days, or maybe even years, She was simply standing idle without particular thoughts. She sincerely admired the summer sunset, piercing the space between the horizon and the moving carriage with crimson golden rays. Beautiful, Eleanor breathed out in admiration, and apparently did so aloud, because a similar sigh came from nearby, as if in response, in a male voice. You can say that again, Eleanor Margaret. It's very beautiful. But I never would have guessed you paid attention to such things. Ellie started in surprise and didn't even immediately realize she had been addressed by her full name, and when she suddenly realized she knew the voice well, she just shook her head. If there was anything she lacked to finally and irrevocably hate carriage life, it was precisely the presence of this man here. Honestly, she would rather have stayed in her compartment, listened to her neighbors' gossip, and who knows, might have become imbued with the ideas of folk medicine and garden vegetable values. In any case, she had a better chance of that than of having a normal conversation with the man who had suddenly ruined her enjoyment of the sunset. She raised her head and squinted. Well, I'll be Charles Stephen, she exclaimed, rather awkwardly feigning joy. What a pleasant surprise, is that you? Yep, it's me, he confirmed, also joyfully, but unlike her, he seemed sincere. Can you imagine what an unexpected meeting? And I'm standing here, you see, looking, and I can't believe my eyes. I even rubbed them. Good heavens, I think it's Eleanor Margaret herself in person. Not Mary, but Eleanor, she hissed through clenched teeth. I've told you 1,000 times, don't mangle my name with some silly rustic accent. Save your swaggering simplicity for gullible girls. Yes. Oh, well, don't be offended. I didn't invent it. That's what they called you at our factory. You see, Eleanor, the craftswoman. You certainly spun some intricate webs there in 2 weeks. So intricate. Now the entire management is sitting around wondering how we're going to untangle ourselves. He spoke with a serious expression, but his eyes were openly laughing. You're all lying, Ellie suddenly declared, as if I don't know that all the silly and, by the way, not at all funny jokes going around the factory are your handiwork. In short, all this nastiness comes from you. And as for the business, you shouldn't have tangled things up. That is, let things get so out of hand. Then you wouldn't have to sit around with the entire management now. By the way, maybe someone else will end up sitting there too. Well, in the literal sense, for real. For negligence in reporting, Eleanor flared up. And personally, if I were you, respected Charles Stephen, I wouldn't be so calm and self-confident. After all, the chief engineer is not the least important person at the factory. So, in short, I don't wish to talk to you, especially on such topics. And in general, no, I'm unpleasant to see you. When I think that this pleasure will last for 2 days, it sends shivers down my spine. So, on the contrary, it's a hellishly unpleasant unpleasantness. That's all. I wish you success. She turned her back on the man and dashed towards her compartment, and then suddenly stopped as if she had hit an invisible wall and couldn't believe her ears. There was a quiet laugh from behind her. She turned around in astonishment. He was indeed laughing. And suddenly Eleanor caught herself thinking that she hadn't seen anything more attractive in a long time. Unless, of course, you counted today's sunset. Still, despite all his disgusting mannerisms, strange sense of humor, and monstrous, inexplicably base self-confidence, he, Charles Stephen Miller, was handsome. Just handsome. That's all there was to it. And denying it was as silly as claiming that the sun was rising right now instead of setting. Now, when he wasn't wearing a grubby overall, his cheeks were cleanly shaven, and there wasn't a permanent smear of machine oil on his forehead or nose, it was especially noticeable. His rather fine, regular features did not make his face effeminate. On the contrary, it was 100% masculinity, just beautiful. But the main adornment of his face was his eyes, light gray, transparent, framed by dark eyelashes. Combined with his dark hair, high forehead, white teeth, and excellent build, it all looked very impressive. And the most amazing thing was that the owner of all this external wealth was completely natural, and seemed to say to everyone around him with his whole appearance, "Well, yes, I'm handsome, I know, but it's not my fault I was born this way. Although, to be honest, I'm not complaining. If I've offended anyone by this, I apologize, but generally it's nonsense. So, what were we going to talk about?" But despite all his attractiveness, Eleanor couldn't stand him. She had got to know Miller quite well during the 2 weeks she had spent at the factory. She recognized his merits, at least some of them, and, what's more, she even owed him her salvation in the literal sense of the word. And yet she couldn't help herself. She found him deeply unsympathetic. But it happens that people are simply unpleasant to each other without objective reasons, without explanations, on the level of feelings and emotions. That's exactly how it was for her, for Eleanor, in relation to the factory's chief engineer, Miller. And it seemed the antipathy was mutual. At least he didn't miss a single opportunity to needle her, often quite painfully. In short, her relationship with Miller was difficult and not particularly pleasant. And this was all the more terrible because he was undoubtedly interesting, handsome, brave, decisive, intelligent. And there was something else, something she couldn't formulate but only vaguely felt. And this something bothered her, interfered with her life. Because of this, she was even angrier at Miller. Because of all this, he was even more repulsive. He's like some kind of nastiness in an alluring, beautiful package, she thought angrily, flopping down in her seat and startling her neighbors, who even interrupted their discussion of composting or mulching. However, for Ellie, it was all the same. "What's wrong, dearie?" the older woman asked, looking at Eleanor with concern. "You have spots all over your face. Wait, I'll pour you some tea from the thermos with chamomile and honey. It's very calming. Maybe you need anything else?" "Yes," Eleanor nodded. "Like, can you help me throw someone out of the carriage? He's hanging around, you see, some unfinished Alain Delon." "Oh, are you talking about Charlie?" The old woman suddenly reacted quite unexpectedly. "And yes, it's true. He does look like Fanfan La Tulipe, only older. Yes, a bit sturdier, a bit more solid. And how did I not figure it out myself?" "About Charlie?" Ellie repeated in astonishment. "Do you know him?" "Well, how do I know him?" The woman smiled. "We met at the station while he was helping me out. You see, we haven't even introduced ourselves. And we're traveling together for 2 days. What are your names, dears?" "Eleanor," she grumbled, trying to put a pleasant expression on her face. It's easy to be silent when you don't know anyone. You're not obliged to talk. But now you have to. Introductions have been made, and a compartment acquaintance is almost like family, at least for the duration of the journey. "Ellie, wonderful. My name is Agnes Jane, and this is Dorothy." The old woman nodded towards her tomato-minded companion. "Well, so, who were we talking about? Oh, Charles." Her face broke into a smile. "He helped me so much with my suitcase, confound it. He dragged it and me along to the carriage, shoved us in, so thanks to him I'm traveling. Otherwise I'd still be sitting on my trunk in the station square." "Big deal, a savior, just a normal male act," Eleanor grumbled. "He's still a bore." "Charlie a bore?" Agnes Jane exclaimed in surprise. "What are you saying, Ellie? He's a wonderful person." "Oh, how long have you known him?" "A couple of hours. And I've had that pleasure for 2 weeks now, so I know better," Eleanor declared. "Oh, Ellie, do you really need time for that? You can see such people right away, at first glance, with your heart. He's a wonderful person," Agnes stated. "All right, Agnes Jane, I won't argue with you." Eleanor waved her hand and lay down on her bunk. "Well, I'll be. What a cherub, a savior of old women. Siberian Fan-Fan. And he's not Fan-Fan at all, he's a braggart. Oh, forget him altogether." As if she had nothing else to worry about. She herself, by the way, had God knows what going on in her life. But deciding not to think about Miller was much easier than actually not doing so. Her thoughts kept returning to this man, who was completely unlike anyone she had met in her 35 years of life, and who suddenly, by a strange twist of fate, found himself very close, literally just beyond the thin partition of the compartment. At the factory, located in a small Siberian town 3,000 kilometers from the capital, Eleanor found herself by order of the head of their enormous holding, which united more than one such enterprise under its wing. Henry Albert was Ellie's patron in the literal and figurative sense of the word. He was an old friend of the Smith family, was friends with Ellie's father, and, as family legends had it, even honestly and openly tried to win the girl away from his friend. But the girl preferred George Smith, became his wife, gave birth to their daughter Eleanor, and Henry, in his own words, remained forever inconsolable, in love, looming before the newlyweds like an eternal reproach. However, Irene always laughed cheerfully recalling the story. "Well, yes, Hank, I remember how long and tempestuously you grieved. For about 2 days," she would nod, "and then you went to the cinema with your Sally, so don't blab or people will think we have a love triangle." Despite such details, the trio remained friends throughout their lives, and having buried his friend who died suddenly, Henry seemed to take responsibility for Irene and 10-year-old Ellie, and was very pleased when Eleanor, finishing school, having outgrown her girlish dreams of a film career, modeling or sports fame, seriously considered finance as a future profession. "That's right, Ellie," the by then solid, authoritative, and very wealthy businessman would pontificate. "You go and study and then come and work for me. We've got things developing here now. You know, I need my own people, especially in these financial matters, where even the devil himself would break his leg." Ellie graduated from university and, of course, came to work for that very holding, where Henry Albert was one of the founders, directors, shareholders, in short, the most important person. "Well, everyone will say that you hired me only because I'm a Smith, your friend's daughter," she doubted. "And why can't I hire you because of that?" Henry asked, surprised. "Especially since you're like a daughter to me, too." "Well, Ellie, don't bother your head with nonsense. Start working. And if it turns out I was wrong about you, well, I'll fire you, regardless of your surname. That's how we'll fix your reputation." But the old businessman was not mistaken. Eleanor turned out to be an excellent financier, and each year of work only added to her experience, foresight, and intuition. After several years, she became the company's chief economist auditor, spending a considerable part of her time traveling to numerous enterprises, firms, factories, mills, and combines, assessing the correctness of reporting and the efficiency of production. "Eleanor Margaret, dearie." Henry always addressed her with this strange phrase when a difficult conversation was ahead. "We, or rather you, have a little trip coming up, you see. We need to comb through our factory in NSK. Things have really gone downhill there." "In NSK?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "Hasn't it been closed yet? I thought they were planning to. The profits there are next to nothing. The costs are enormous. Before making such a decision definitively, we need to go, study the situation thoroughly, figure out how much needs to be invested and if it's worth it. So, you go." Henry suddenly livened up. "You know, my good friend Charles Miller has been working there as chief engineer for about 10 years. What a guy. And you take a closer look at him there." "What? In what sense?" Ellie flared up. "In that very sense." The man nodded with a smile. "Henry Albert, you're completely— I beg to remind you, I'm married." "Oh, come on, Ellie, what married?" "Forgive me, old fool that I am, for meddling in your affairs. I just can't bear to see you suffering and wasting your life on a man who never deserved you." "All right, that's enough. I'm sorry. You're a big girl. You'll figure out your own affairs. And as for the factory, I repeat to you again, I will only agree to liquidate it if everything there is completely hopeless." "Well, Ellie, you know, it's my hometown. There's nowhere else for people to work particularly. I wouldn't want to deprive them of their last resort, and the people there are wonderful." So, mentally scolding her boss for his unexpected sentimentality, Eleanor found herself in the far distance, at an old, dilapidated factory that was, in her opinion, completely pointlessly doing so. On the very first day of her business trip, she became convinced that all her suspicions were correct. Everything here was bad, very bad, even worse. The equipment was old, the machines rattled like a pile of scrap metal, and the financial reporting was simply appalling with errors, miscalculations, and outright blunders. Who Henry was so admiring of, talking about wonderful people she, frankly speaking, didn't understand. She met the chief engineer, that very what-a-guy, under rather scandalous circumstances, such that she herself was, frankly, a little ashamed to recall the meeting. For a couple of days she sat in the accounting department, rummaging through reports, frowning angrily, remaining significantly and tragically silent, frightening the unfortunate chief accountant with her appearance, and finally said, "Right, well, everything is clear to me here. I need to talk to the management of all this." She gestured around an imaginary figure, meaning the factory disgrace. "But, Eleanor Margaret, you know the director and his deputy will be here tomorrow. From the management, only Miller is at work now. He's our chief engineer." Suddenly the lady livened up as if she felt a surge of energy. "It would even be better for you to talk to Charles Stephen. You have a lot of questions about the equipment, after all." "Yes, very many." Eleanor smirked. "Where is this chief engineer's office of yours?" "His office is nearby, the next one down the corridor." "But he's not there." "He's hardly ever in his office," replied the chief accountant. And in general, does anyone from your management actually come to work? Just for a change? Ellie asked, annoyed. Oh, no, no, you misunderstood. The woman rattled quickly. He is at work. He just doesn't sit in his office. He's mostly in the workshops. You go straight there, they'll show you. Only, Eleanor Margaret, you should change your shoes. It's not very clean in there. It's production, after all. It's not just not very clean here. Ellie mimicked the chief accountant, getting up decisively. You have outright dirt everywhere here, literally and figuratively. Now, where is your unfortunate chief engineer? Ellie shouted irritably, trying to be heard over the noise of the machines and keep her safety helmet from slipping onto her nose. She should have listened to that funny, naive woman from accounting and changed her shoes after all. But now it was too late, and an oily stain of some nasty substance was spreading on her wonderful suede shoe. Out of annoyance, she was ready to immediately grab the throat of that damn chief engineer, because of whom she was trudging through the dirty workshop. Why unfortunate? A voice said from somewhere around her knees. She jumped back in fright. A dirty man in overalls, with hands so smeared they looked alien and simply attached to his sleeves, was crawling out from under a motionless line of machinery. Why unfortunate? He continued in a slightly hoarse voice. Very happy with life, actually. And if I manage to catch the hockey match broadcast in the evening, I'll be completely happy. Ellie stared in astonishment at the talking worker. No, this wasn't a factory. It was some kind of circus, a big top. Listen, you, she frowned. I'm certainly impressed by your knowledge of your boss's affairs, but just tell me where he is. Where is this so-called chief engineer of yours? Again, you're wrong, the strange worker grumbled. He's not so-called, he's quite real. That's it, I've had enough, Eleanor snapped, getting angry. This is just a real madhouse. Either you tell me where your Miller is immediately, or I'll... No need for anything. I'm here, the dirty man in overalls suddenly said. Excuse the appearance, but allow me to introduce myself. Miller, Charles Stephen. Ah, and why? She struggled to find words, but quickly recovered and almost shouted, Why are you here and looking like this? Don't you have anything better to do? What on earth is going on here? Are you a manager or what? How can anyone take you seriously? This is why everything here is in such a state, because you, the factory's chief engineer, instead of controlling business processes, organizing, coordinating work, are sitting under some piece of iron and tightening nuts. You see, my dear woman, if I don't immediately tighten this nut on the piece of iron right now, I'm afraid there will be nothing to organize and coordinate, and nothing to manage either. The business process will collapse, the man replied sadly. But she had a distinct feeling that he was laughing inside. His eyes gave him away, large, light gray, shining on that grimy face like two precious gems of very pure and high quality. And what's this, my dear woman? She retorted. I'm not your dear, and I am not a woman. Really? Miller asked, surprised. Well, about the first, I can agree. It's a bit early to call you dear, but what about the second? What are you, if not a woman? And again, that obvious sly, good-natured mockery, and the faces around, not all of them smiling at something instead of working. Probably those wonderful people, according to Henry. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to remember something from the numerous training sessions she had attended on effective interaction with personnel, but nothing suitable came to mind, so she simply and scandalously yelled, her voice rising at the end of her words. That's it. Enough. I'm tired of this. Remember, my name is Eleanor Margaret, and I have come for a comprehensive audit of your enterprise. And I have the broadest authority, up to and including shutting down your whole shoddy outfit. In 20 minutes, I expect you, Mr. Miller, in the director's office with documentation for all equipment and clear explanations for the inefficient use of the fixed assets and assets entrusted to you. I can't make it in 20 minutes. Let's say 40, Miller said calmly. Eleanor Margaret, please don't take it as disrespect for your broadest authority, but I absolutely must get this fixed asset entrusted to me up and running, and I also need to wash off my assets. To the laughter of the now quite numerous crowd, he extended his dirty hands towards her, covered in ingrained, seemingly permanent dirt. Eleanor suddenly realized that if she wanted to save face, or rather what was left of it, she'd better keep quiet. She snorted, tilted her nose up, turned sharply on the spot, and almost fell flat on the floor because of a broken heel. Oh dear, who runs around a factory in shoes like that? It's unprofitable, she heard a quiet, hoarse voice, and finally hated its owner completely. Boor, lout, rude fellow, she muttered, hobbling on her mismatched heels towards the factory office. He probably became a boss by pure chance, just because there was no one else to appoint in this hole. All he can do is tinker with iron. And yet, he thinks he's witty. Well, never mind. I'll organize a satire and humor contest for you. Exactly 40 minutes later, a short, broad-shouldered man entered the director's office, nodded gravely, and sat down at the desk. Ellie noted out of the corner of her eye his solid movements, excellent suit, neatly combed hair. Well, thank God. At least someone is sane, at least dressed normally, not clowning around. Ellie thought, quickly finishing writing a sentence, raised her head, and stared in astonishment at Miller himself. You! She raised her eyebrows, trying to pretend she wasn't surprised by his appearance. Well, that's completely different. It turns out you can look quite presentable. I can. He nodded with a sigh. Though it rarely happens. Mostly I have to run around the workshop with a wrench, repairing fixed assets. Exactly. Why are you running around? That's the duty of a repair fitter, an adjuster, or whatever he's called on your staff list. He should be dealing with the equipment. I completely agree with you, Eleanor Margaret. Only we do have a staff list, a beautiful big one. You read it and your soul rejoices. But there are no repair fitters. That's the snag. He nodded seriously. Firstly, I am not Mary. I am Eleanor. Eleanor Margaret, she enunciated clearly. And secondly, why don't you have any fitters? Well, probably for the same reason we don't have turners, millers, general laborers, and many other things. We pay little so people don't come to us. Serious salaries are paid at enterprises that generate profit. That's a simple truth, and you, as a manager, a leader, should know that and explain it to your subordinates. Eleanor said proudly. I know, Eleanor Margaret, and I completely agree with you. I tell Joe, my last adjuster, that every morning first thing, Joe, look, wait, and as soon as profit comes flooding in, you'll immediately get a serious salary. Miller looked at her without the slightest hint of a smile. She sighed deeply. A terrible man. Although he looks, of course. Yes, he looks. Right, what was she thinking about? Stop calling me Mary. I'm Eleanor. Right, let's talk specifically about your affairs. I looked at the reports on equipment maintenance and operating costs. My hair stood on end. What profit can we talk about when, with terrible expenses, the utilization rate of machines and lines is below 40%? Are you completely out of your mind? Can you explain this to me as the chief engineer? I can, he nodded. But for fairness, let's first rename me the chief antique restorer, because half of our equipment has long existed only on these papers. He pushed several folders towards her. And what's left works, thank God, at the percentages you mentioned, respected Eleanor Margaret, with God's help and ours. And yes, you're not Mary, I remember. Listen, Miller, let's talk seriously, she said after a pause. You understand that with the current state of affairs, it's more profitable for the holdings management to close the factory than to invest huge sums in it. Well, yes, of course, it's more profitable, and no need to think about 1,000 people who will be left without work. And do you know that we have 9 dynasties of hereditary factory masters? And the fact that we still make the best quality products on our old junk, there's not much of it, but it's the best. He waved his hand. Well, all right, wait. Let's say you have excellent masters in production, but the specialists, they're useless. I spent 2 days checking the accounting entries and reports. Your Vera Christine? Her knowledge is that of a technical college graduate, and she's the chief accountant. And Vera is a technical college graduate, and even if she lacks something, she's an honest person and works for 3. Miller scowled. You know, Eleanor Margaret, I've been working here for 10 years, and not once during that time has a single girl from the capital in suede shoes come here to work. Otherwise, we might have had a great chief accountant. It's easy for you to say. You were born here, you live here, probably all your life. Do you think it's easy to just pick up and move to this backwater? And, by the way, I've wanted to ask you for a long time, where did you get your Moscow diploma? She suddenly remembered. By chance, Eleanor Margaret, just like the position of chief engineer. A pure misunderstanding. He smiled. Stop calling me Mary. Ellie corrected him habitually, more to catch her breath. All right, Charles Stephen, you can go. Thank you. You're welcome, not Mary Margaret, he said and left. Well, how can you have a normal conversation with a person like that? Oh, come on, Eleanor Margaret. How is he local? Miller is your compatriot, a native Muscovite. He studied there? Yes, yes. His parents still live there. He goes to visit them on holiday. The girl from the HR department was terribly flattered by the attention of the auditor from the Capitol, and especially by the fact that the lady was clearly making inquiries about Miller, confidentially, so to speak. You know, I don't know all the details and I don't like gossip, but Charles Stephen is, well, simply a romantic hero to us. He had some kind of personal tragedy there in Moscow, something terrible. That's why he left and came here. And he lives here, well, just like some kind of monk, can you imagine, with his looks. Henry Albert. Eleanor mumbled into the receiver, embarrassed. And Miller, why is he stuck here anyway? Interested? Charles has got you hooked? Henry suddenly sounded pleased. In what way? What are you talking about? Ellie exclaimed indignantly. It's just that he's, how should I put it, unusual perhaps? He has... Ellie, his life is in complete ruins. His wife was pregnant and died. That happened a long time ago, many years ago. Since then, he's been wandering the world alone. But fortunately, he's suffering in the vicinity of our factory. Everything there depends solely on Charles. Well, I think you've already realized that yourself. Imagine that. It turns out this man has a lot of rather grim things behind him, and yet he sometimes behaves like a stand-up comedian, she thought then. And a few days later, perhaps the most terrible episode of her life occurred. That day, she got bogged down with documents and left the factory office when the dense August twilight had already set in. The hotel where Eleanor was staying during the business trip was located nearby, a couple of stops away, but it was late and waiting for a bus seemed like a dubious undertaking. I'll walk, Eleanor decided, remembering a shady alley shown to her by someone from the factory, which stretched through a semi-abandoned park, cutting off a decent portion of the path and leading directly to the hotel. After a whole day spent in a dusty office among piles of papers, Ellie inhaled the refreshed evening air with pleasure and briskly padded along the paved path, and suddenly, two figures emerged silently from the darkness, as if woven from the air. One quickly stepped onto the path in front of Ellie, and the second behind her, cutting off her retreat. Right, the one standing in front drawled in a low male voice. However, it was already clear that these were tall, burly men. In the twilight, from the horror that gripped her entire body, they seemed simply enormous. Well, well, what a fairy, and she herself is quite something, and such a promising handbag, right, Mick? He continued. The one standing behind mumbled something, clearly sharing the admiration for the woman in her handbag. All right, lady, let's do this nicely. If we come to an agreement, nothing will happen to you. Well, nothing too bad, that is. Gentleman's word. He laughed. Listen, do you need money? Eleanor finally managed to overcome the spasm in her throat. I only have a card, but I'll tell you the code. Here, please take it. She fumbled with trembling hands to open her bag. Of course you'll tell us, absolutely, but that's later, afterwards, the man grinned. She couldn't fully see his face because of the dark hood pulled low over it, but she saw dark stubble among which teeth gleamed in a terrible smirk. A real beast, flashed through her mind. In fact, compared to this creature, who was only called a human by mistake, even the hungriest evil wolf in a dark forest would have seemed like a harmless puppy. And of course, she didn't believe his assurances for a second that he supposedly wouldn't do anything too bad to her. I wonder how quickly they'll find me, if they find me at all. And if they do, will there be anything left to send to Mum? So much for taking a shortcut, you poor idiot, Ellie suddenly thought, somehow detachedly, almost calmly. Please, please don't touch me, she said in a trembling, breaking voice. Oh, come on, madam, I'm a well-mannered man. Did you notice I'm not even using you informally, but continue to address you respectfully with you formally? He chuckled. I told you I'm a gentleman. For some reason, after this phrase, Ellie became especially frightened. If they had been simple thugs, dazed by drink and some other nastiness, there would have been hope of persuading them, bribing them, stalling for time, or finally simply trying to break free and run away. But before her stood two strong, firmly rooted villains, from whom emanated waves of malice and cruelty. Hey, you gentlemen, she suddenly heard a quiet, firm voice. Get out of the way, let the person pass. From the horror that paralyzed her, She couldn't even turn around to look at the unexpected fairy tale-like help. However, it wasn't necessary. The new character in this creepy scene appeared from somewhere to the side and resolutely, ignoring the livened-up men, pushed Ellie behind his back, moving her to the side of the alley. "Oh, what a lucky day today, right, Mick?" The one in the hood grinned. "Check out the jacket on the guy. You've wanted one like that for a long time, haven't you? Come on, guy. Take off your jacket and get out of here quickly. I have a date with the lady here." "Doesn't look like it," the unexpected defender chuckled, whose voice, as Ellie emerged slightly from her stupor, seemed familiar. "You don't have flowers, and the lady isn't throwing herself around your neck." Ellie raised her head and her gaze met the back of the speaker. He was strong, but he was far from being a bandit. He was shorter, smaller, and clearly weaker. "Well, a rival then." The man in the hood bared his teeth like an animal again. "And I don't tolerate rivals. I simply eliminate them, literally." He slowly pulled his hand from his pocket, and a blade gleamed brightly in the light in his fist. "Right. The evening is ceasing to be romantic," the man standing in front of Ellie muttered. She squeezed her eyes shut in horror, and when she opened them, she blinked in astonishment. Still clutching the knife in his hand, the attacker, met with a move that left him with a look of astonishment on his face, fell to the ground and became still. The man stepped on his hand holding the knife, added a quick, precise blow to the head, and straightened up. It was Miller. He quickly smiled at the astonished Eleanor and turned to the second bandit. "You wanted my jacket?" Charles grumbled. The guy mumbled something unintelligible and lunged forward, and a second later choked on a gurgle as he ran into a fist. Miller's second fist came down on the top of his head, and suddenly, perhaps because of the helpless expression that appeared on his face, he seemed like a boy to Ellie, almost a child. "Oh, you'll kill him," Ellie blurted out. "Why are you beating him?" She asked this almost with indignation, as if this very guy hadn't threatened her with a terrible fate just a few minutes ago. Miller looked at Eleanor in surprise and shook his head, and she, relieved from danger, hating herself for it, instead of thanking him for saving her, suddenly said in a nasty voice, "By the way, brute force isn't always the best argument, and anyway, we need the police." Miller nodded seriously and took his phone out of his pocket. "Station? Who?" "Captain Peterson." "Oh, Pete, hello." "Yeah, it's me." Miller smiled broadly. "Pete, good to hear from you. When did you get back? They said you went to Baikal fishing." "Yes, I was there." Pete, you're a pig, of course. You could have invited me." "All right." "Well, how's the omelfish there? You don't say, what were you catching it with? On a mormishka? Listen, have you tried?" Charles stood there chatting on the phone as if sitting in an armchair at home, not standing in the middle of a dark alley with bandits lying 2 steps away, and with her, Ellie, trembling and sobbing nearby, apparently having a delayed hysterical fit. "Oh, Pete, all right. Tell me all the details later. Why am I calling, Comrade Captain? I need you to send a patrol. We've got 2 citizens relaxing here, one with a very sharp knife and a beautiful woman they scared badly. And also," he looked at Eleanor ironically and chuckled, "I need to be detained and questioned about exceeding the limits of self-defense." "Why jokes, Pete? I mean, Comrade Captain. This citizen insists that I could have acted more gently somehow. Although, you know..." He suddenly leaned down, looking closely at the face of the man lying on the ground, whose hood had slipped off. "It seems gentleness wouldn't have worked here. I suspect this is Vinny, your old charge. What's going on, Pete? Why is this one running free? How many times has he been out now? Oh, excellent. How happy I am for him. Released, you say, and apparently went straight to the library, and took a knife to carefully cut stuck pages. You're something, Comrade Captain Pete. He's scaring people, and you're fishing on Baikal. All right, go on, send them. We'll wait on our old alley, right near the former stand with former leading workers of the former production." "Can you ever be serious?" Eleanor asked him when he put his phone back in his pocket. "Eleanor, Margaret, I am very serious, truly. And now that I've seen who exactly attacked you here, I'm even a little scared, honestly. If I'd known it was Vinny the recidivist, I would never have gotten involved. Well, you see, since it happened, please forgive me for beating him up. Don't report me to the police, okay?" Miller lowered his eyes with a guilty, contrite look. You're a clown, you are," she burst out indignantly. "You're ready to turn everything into a circus. I'm tired of repeating myself. I'm not Mary, I'm Eleanor." Eleanor, 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 Ellie, Ellie. Someone gently but noticeably shook her shoulder. Ellie, dear, wake up, get up. It's been morning for a long time. My, how you slept. You can tell right away this person loves traveling by train. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes. Agnes, Jane, and Dorothy were sitting opposite her, smiling, as if contemplating a sleepy, rumpled face with hair standing on end was the most pleasant thing imaginable. Morning? Eleanor asked, astonished. Did I sleep all night? And how? The old woman laughed. It was a joy to see and hear. Ellie looked in astonishment at her reflection in the small mirror. Well, I'll be. She lay down to think about life. When the memories turned into a healthy and unprecedentedly long sleep, she didn't remember. Ellie, why did we decide to wake you up? Please don't be angry, dearie, but a guest is coming to see us now. Agnes Jane smiled. So you should wash up and comb your hair, and we'll have breakfast. A guest? Eleanor exclaimed in surprise, and suddenly noticed that both her compartment neighbors were dressed in nice tracksuits, had clearly styled their hair as much as traveling conditions allowed, and had even, imagined that, put on lipstick. Yes, Charlie, I mean Charles Stephen, Agnes said. Well, not exactly a guest, actually. He's coming to fix our lock, because the door in our compartment is stuck. Dorothy and I could barely get out this morning. We don't have such a heroic sleep as you do, Ellie. Agnes laughed softly. Fix the door. Charles, Eleanor said, confused, and didn't even immediately realize that for the first time his name caused her not irritation, but joy. She listened to herself in astonishment and asked, and who even allowed him to fix anything here? Oh, come on, Ellie. Charles has golden hands. He's already fixed half the breakdowns in the carriage. He fixed the samovar, several sockets. Even the conductor is completely smitten with him. She even gave him a little bottle of cordial, and he told us he'd finish his business and come to us with that bottle. So you, Ellie, should also dress up a bit because he's so... And Agnes blushed poetically and shyly. Miller came, and not alone, but with his neighbor, the very intellectual-looking man who had boarded with the Crossword magazine. Well, Charles, the man said, holding the compartment door, everything you do is so clever, is simply amazing. You truly are a master. And I, frankly, at first thought you were some kind of scientist. You won't believe it. He turned to the ladies. I considered myself an experienced crossword solver, but compared to Charles, I'm nothing. He just knows everything. Do any of you, for example, know which admiral sank the Turkish fleet in the Battle of Chesme? Or which classic of Russian literature discovered 20 new species of butterflies? Or what is the unit of measurement for the intensity of smell? No, neither do I know nor remember. But he knows. All the answers to all the questions, the man laughed. Just some kind of magician. Oh, come on, Albert Lewis, Charles chuckled, checking the repaired lock. Well, I know a few things. You can just think about some things and figure them out, even if you don't know. For example? The attendees asked eagerly. Well, for example, this question. Which living creature has its brain located furthest from its heart? Right, interesting. And who is it? Agnes, Jane, and Dorothy exclaimed, clapping their hands. Well, think about it. Estimate the distance, figure it out. There's something to keep you busy. Enough for half the journey. Charles smiled. Oh, but Charles Stephen, will never guess. No, you must tell us. The women worried. We'll just torment ourselves. Please tell us. A giraffe, Ellie suddenly said quietly. A giraffe's brain is furthest from its heart. Charles looked at her and nodded silently, almost imperceptibly. And the minutes, the hours flew by so quickly that she didn't even notice how the journey, which had seemed unbearable and endless, came to an end. And now she waited with dread for the train's last stop, the last look at him, the last touch of that strong yet gentle hand with traces of machine oil permanently ingrained in the skin. Having said goodbye to everyone, Charles suddenly turned, walked quickly to her, and slipped a piece of paper into her hands. Eleanor Margaret, Eleanor, Ellie. Perhaps we will never see each other again, but just promise me one thing. If you ever need help, if you need me, just call me. I will do anything for you. He looked at her attentively, honestly, and desperately, and she saw recognition in those eyes. His recognition of something for which words were unnecessary. Charles picked up his bag and quickly strode towards the carriage exit. Oh, Ellie, forgive me, of course, she heard Agnes Jane's voice. We certainly will never see each other again. And this is what I'll tell you, dear. You, Ellie, are a silly girl. That is, forgive me again, just a fool. He loves you, and you love him. Even a half-blind old woman like me can see that. Ah, Ellie, what giraffes you are. When Henry spoke of her worthless family life before sending Ellie on her business trip, he himself did not suspect how close he was to the truth. That life, that family, and indeed everything had long ceased to exist for her. She and Arthur had lived for almost 8 years and never understood why those years were spent, and it had never been so difficult to return to her apartment as it was after those weeks at the factory and 2 amazing days on the train. Eleanor, I filed for divorce, she heard from Arthur as soon as she crossed the threshold. Ellie, I know you won't be happy. It's all somehow unexpected, undignified, perhaps. I don't know, but I think you're the only one who's doing well. Thank you. I've never been so grateful to you in all these years. Thank you. Eleanor grabbed her astonished and frightened husband, or rather ex-husband, by the hand and shook it. She rushed out of the apartment despite all of Arthur's attempts to explain something about court, property division, apartment documents, some other nonsense that she didn't need at all right now. She wanted only one thing, to dial the number written on the piece of paper and hear his voice say her name, slightly mispronouncing it in that simple way as Mary. And he answered so quickly that the first ring hadn't even faded, as if he had been waiting for her call continuously. They sat on a comfortable bench under an old maple tree, which was already noticeably lit up with autumn colors. You know, Charlie, she said, feeling his warmth, tenderness, and strength, sensing it with every cell of her being and melting with happiness, such simple and easy happiness. It's amazing, because back then, well, when we ended up on the same train, at first I thought I simply hated you, didn't I? And now, just a few days later, I don't understand how I could have lived without you for so many years. It's unthinkable. Well, what's so incomprehensible and amazing about that, Ellie? You know the saying, from love to hate is just one step. And who said the path from hate to love is longer?